Hi, everyone, and welcome to the shared lessons with myself, Matilde Marengo, and, well, Jacopo Neri, who isn't here with me, but I'll be taking you through an intro to urban ecology, ecological connectivity, and data-driven design approaches. So firstly, I just wanted to give a little bit of a general context, which is that of planetary urbanization. So planetary urbanization is a phenomenon that we are well aware of at the moment, and it's one of the main threats to fine ecological balances. In particular, one of the issues is landscape fragmentation, and urbanities and cities in general are some of the main drivers to landscape fragmentation. In fact, as we can see here, the closer you get to the city, the more fragmented all the different typologies of land are. And so this creates some big issues for ecological systems that can no longer function as full systems, but rather function as fragmented systems and therefore can't ensure the health of the entire systems. So with this in mind, we begin to ask ourselves if we can in some way define what the limits of the urban is today, or whether everything to some extent is urban or at least urbanized. So we know that 3% of the world's surface is considered urban to some extent, but we also know that 70% of the world's surface is consumed by human processes. So in this sense, when we talk about consumed by human processes, we're talking about spaces that have undergone transformation from their natural or unprocessed state into an alteration through human action. So this can be often linked with the ways in which we consume obviously food, but also products, and consequently the territory, and can be related to physical, but also informational resources. So with that in mind, we try and flip the coin and ask ourselves if we can define it, considering that, the urban or the limits or the borders of the urban are a little bit complex to define, if we can then define what is natural in some way. So what I've done is, what we've done is we've collected a series of images that are in some way prompts to think about, and that maybe you can discuss in class with your faculty or your colleagues, questioning what is natural. So what we see in this image is a palm tree plantation for the production of palm oil in Indonesia. And it's interesting to reflect on how natural this image is, or how natural the territory that this image represents is. What are the natural elements? So we can see obviously trees, but we can also see that the trees are positioned in specific points. And we can also see that there's only one type of tree. So is this natural or is it urban? In the same way, if we zoom out and we look at a slightly different perspective, we also see here palm oil plantations, but what we see is a plot that is or was in its natural state. So if the plots around this plot, which is in its natural state, have been transformed and are to some extent urbanized with natural elements, is this plot that remains within this square here that we see, is this plot natural or urbanized? And obviously there we can start to think about the different relational questions. So who is inhabiting this plot, and how do these animals or these systems behave if they are in some way retained into a smaller space? And finally, if we zoom out even more, this is a picture from the Amazon rainforest. And can we start questioning, what is natural and what isn't natural? And is there something that's natural in this image, if we reflect on the scaling down process that we had in the last two images? So these are things that would be great that you discuss with your colleagues and in class. So in that sense, we can reflect on the bigger picture of what is going on in the planet today. And as I'm sure many of you know, we are in the Anthropocene geological age. So consequently, everything that is happening in the environment is in some way impacted by human activity. So we're in a moment where it's really complex to actually define or distinguish what is natural from what is artificial, or at least their relation or their interrelation or the limits between these two things is incredibly debatable. So within this context, we can begin to in some way reflect on what is urban and if everything is in some way urban, and how could we then potentially define the spaces that we inhabit today, their relationship between themselves and what they bring together. So within this context, we begin to question, how do we design for the future? No. So how can we in some way design solutions where the urban space is limitless, yet we know that we need to in some way sustain or foment even habitat resilience? How can we design when we're dealing with something that is continuously uncertain? No? What does the future hold for us? I mean, we can look at what's happened so far. Was it what we thought would happen? And how can we imagine that the future or that the space that we inhabit will evolve in the future? And consequently, what are the key concepts that we really need to sort of ensure within design development today? So to give you some inputs on how we might be able to do this, we've put together a section called methodologies. So how to design in or for uncertainty towards climate change adaptation. So we've put together a couple of concepts that come from a series of projects that we've collected. The project that you can see on the cover of this slide is a project by Batley Roig, very close to Barcelona. It's the transformation of a landfill space into a park within a metropolitan area. It's a very interesting project that I invite you to go through, as well as the ones that we will show you now. So the first key in some way to a methodological approach for uncertainty, but also towards climate change adaptation, is to think of multi-scalar design or systemic design. So as we were looking at the images that you saw earlier, where we had the zoom in of the palm trees, all very close together, and then we zoomed out and we saw that there was a patch of, in some way, natural state rainforest. Yet we understand that because of the fact that that patch is located in the middle of a palm plantation, that patch in itself begins to function very differently from if it were within a large and integrated ecological system. So what does it mean that things are connected? And how can we in some way approach design through multiple scales? The second question is how we can include time into the design process. So we're working in some way towards an uncertain future. But what we want to understand is how the elements within our design processes will be able to adapt to the uncertainties that will take place in time. So in this sense, we're looking at exploiting in some way digital simulations or open-ended solutions. And finally, we want to explore the more than human design possibilities. So who are we designing spaces for? So how can we in some way rethink the perspectives from which we design to include non-human actors in the design process? Can we in some way develop design scenarios where we design together with nature as an active partner within the process and not just a passive observer or whoever will be touched by our design? So a couple of examples are the Freshkills Park by James Corner Field Operations. The project is some years old, and it looked into the renaturalization of the Freshkills landfill, which is just outside of New York City. So here are some images of what the space looked like. And what we see here is the proposal developed by James Corner Field Operations, where they begin to integrate different elements within the territory. As you can see, there are questions of energy. So how is it that we produce the elements that we as humans also need to survive? There's also a series of projects of steps of bonification. So how can we in some way restitute or give back to the territory its natural capacities, its natural functioning, and how can this then have a positive impact on the greater ecosystem? And of course, there are other ecosystem services that are being integrated, such as cultural activities or elements that humans can actively engage with within the context of nature. As we were sort of saying before, it's really important to have a multi-scalar approach, but also an approach to design through time. So here we have a series of evolutions of the project. And as you can see, the project has been planned out over 40 years. So it's been planned out over 40 years. And then after 40 years, other things might happen. What they've looked at, or in some way tried to quantify, is the different natural typologies that come together within this system and how they function over time in order to allow the certain levels of pollution within the soil to be bona fide for us to be able to engage actively with this territory. They've also designed these spaces not only from the perspective of humans, but also trying to understand how different species, both plant and animal species, can actively engage and take advantage of this transition. And here we have a couple of images. On the right, a picture, and on the left, some of the images that were produced for the project proposal. The second project I wanted to touch on is the Monarch Sanctuary by Terraform One. The Monarch Sanctuary is a facade system. So we're looking at a micro-ecological system that is designed to be integrated into a highly urbanized area in order to, in some way, host or engage actively with alternative species. So the building depth in itself is designed to host humans and human activities, whereas the depth of the facade and the envelope in general is designed to host monarch butterflies and other plant species that will allow to actively engage with their ecosystem. Obviously, the building is also designed in some way to be a passive system, and therefore the performance of the facade that hosts the monarch butterflies is not only something for the monarch butterflies, but also brings a positive outcome to the inhabitants of these spaces, the human ones, of course. It also allows for the building in itself to reduce its impact. So here we can see that there's a small-scale prototype of this facade system that Terraform One has been working on, where they are actually prototyping it within the actual site where the building will be implemented. And so the project is coming along quite nicely. So with this in mind, obviously from the perspective of IAC, as I guess some of you may know, we're the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia. And so the Institute was founded around the topic of advanced architecture, where architecture is no longer just related to the physical world, but also the digital world. And so what our interest is in some way is to understand how digital tools can enable us to work with these different challenges within the design context. So working in a multi-scalar and systemic manner, working with engaging with time within the design process, but also sort of questioning and understanding that we can begin to design from different perspectives. So not just for humans or from the human perspective, but also from the natural perspective. So what is the role of digital technologies in all of this? So what our interest is specifically is to look at how digital technologies can enable us as designers to design, of course, but also to manage and strategically understand the landscape that we work with and within as a dynamic, collective, multidisciplinary and multi-scalar system. So we want to be able to, in some way, deal with that. So here we have a series of data-informed design processes where we're looking specifically at the idea of working with eco-intelligent territorial planning. So how can we use dynamic mapping based on multifunctional land values in order to measure land use resilience for climate change adaptive spatial planning? So in this sense, it's quite interesting to look at how territorial planning tools function today. Specifically, the fact that they look at land use through a series of categories that are not capable of understanding or putting in value the multiplicity of functions that land can in fact have. So they look at land from a unique perspective or a unique category, and often this results fundamentally in the loss of the multiple values that land could potentially give. So just as ecosystems don't bring just one service, but they bring multiple ecosystem services, land is exactly the same. So in this sense, what we're interested in looking at in some way is how through let's say, the capacity of territorial planning tools to manage complexity, how they could potentially in some way integrate and understand the multifunctional value of land in itself in order to move away from silver bullet solutions towards hybrid solutions that are capable of understanding the value of trade-offs between different portions of the land, and that can in some way increase the option value of these land parcels in order to be able to respond to uncertainty, and with the end goal of ensuring land resilience. So in order to be able to do that, we often have to work within a context where we're in deep communication between research, planning, and policy. So I invite you to look into LURE, which is the Land Use Resilience platform that has been developed by one of our thesis students here at IAC, Adriana Aguirre-Such, where Adriana delves into the idea of working between data-driven spatial analysis in order to create new taxonomies that are able to recognize the socio-economical values of land, the socio-ecological values of land, and in some way evaluates and represent and understand this multifunctional value of the land systems and the potential trade-offs and benefits that could emerge from this. So specifically, Adriana focused on a series of systems related to soil fertility, habitat maintenance, carbon sequestration, and food production that all enable the land in some way to produce the multiple ecosystem services, but also that the territorial planning that we use, the tools that we use, are able to represent these multiple ecosystem services. So working from the physical capital towards the development of both social and natural capital that enable us to ensure land use resilience. So beyond that, or beyond this context where we understand that land is no longer something that we can categorize in flat categories, but we need to look at the multiple values in the same moment in time, we want to understand if we can access or how we can enable nature to become an active partner within the design process through our access to ecological data sets. So by having access to ecological data sets, how can these data sets represent the voice of ecology and empower ecological connectivity within urbanized areas, with the end goal of working from the urban scale to benefiting the territorial scale through ecological connectivity. So we're looking at, in some way, through this approach to design, reconsidering the polarization between ecological forces and anthropocentric ones in order to be able to design for and within the context of climate change adaptation. So in order to do this, we have been working with the capacity of digital tools to enable us to detect and amplify potential and beneficial connections towards cities that have the capacity to in some way breathe through the nature and the vegetation that is embedded within them. The idea of this, or the end goal, of this, is to ensure habitat resilience. So how can we foster ecological connections to enhance vital ecosystem services? So together with Jacopo and some colleagues at IAC, we've been working on the development of computer-aided ecological connectivity as a digital design process that enables us to connect peripheral forest patches of the cities towards internal urban pockets, and understand how these systems can enhance their connectivity one to the other in order to enable the ecological system as a whole to have a more productive functioning. So this map here that you see is Barcelona. This is the coastline. This is the mountain line behind Barcelona. And so what we see is that through the implementation and the use of Circuitscape, which is a simulation platform based on the use of electrical circuit theory, we can plot and look at the potential and current connectivity, looking at how we can connect from the mountains towards the city, or from the city's parks towards the mountains. And then here we have a potential scenario where we transition a series of plots and we change the land use and understand how these plots could potentially then take on an ecological functioning and therefore enhance the potential of connectivity between the interior green pockets within the urban system and the exterior forest patches. So by overlaying this information, what we extract are the spaces where we have a very high priority to transition from deeply urban to deeply ecological, because they bring the most value in the transition of the entire ecological system. So these spaces up here and here have a very big value in potentially enabling the entire ecological system of the territory, not just of Barcelona, but potentially of Catalonia, in habitat resilience, and consequently in enabling Barcelona to become a breathing city. Now, it's true that in Barcelona, we have a great amount of accessible local data. So we have been working on the system in Barcelona, but we've also been working on ways in which we can use this digital design pipeline in cities where we don't necessarily have access to so much local data. So we've been using Google Earth Engine in order to access non-localized data and understand through the comparison between the localized data version in Barcelona and the non-localized data version in Barcelona, what is the level of accuracy that we can get hold of. So this is a series of examples that we've developed in Berlin, Madrid, and Milan. And looking at what is the level or the level of granularity that we can get through our pipeline. And here you can already see that we have identified a series of spaces where the transformation of these areas would greatly benefit the larger ecological territorial systems around these cities. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. In lesson number 2, we will look at the application of this methodology that I have just discussed. within the context of a series of European cities. And we'll also look at a couple of approaches in order to design with nature. Thank you very much for your attention.